And our gospel comes from John. It's selected verses in chapter 11. Listen to the word of the Lord. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who is to come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The great country singer and theologian Jason Isbell once wrote, "You thought God was an architect. Now you know he's something like a pipe bomb ready to blow." So many of the disappointments that we face in this life have to do with the difference between what we expected and what reality gave us. If you were raised, like me, to think of God as an all-knowing, brilliant architect who designed creation with balance and order in mind, then you might be disappointed by the state of the world. If, like me, you were raised to think of God as a loving father, mindful of his children's needs, then you might be disappointed by the suffering you witness in our community and in our country. We bring to God an expectation of who he should be in our lives and in the lives of our neighbors. God should be a very present help in times of need. We expect him to be the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep, the shepherd who leads us through the valley of the shadow of death. We expect him to be the creator and sustainer of life. So when we experience God to be something totally different, our faith is shaken. Our unmet expectations cause our faith to be replaced by doubt. Maybe God isn't the good shepherd. Maybe he isn't a loving father, we begin to think. How could God let this happen to me, to my friend, to my child? Maybe God is more like a pipe bomb than an architect. Even though I think I've learned much about God in my journey of faith, I still have expectations of him. I still expect God to be a certain way. I expect him to be like the God I meet in the Bible. What has changed for me is that I no longer believe my expectations of God are independent of his expectations of me. In other words, I don't believe that I can set expectations for God without also considering his expectations for me. Let me give you an example. It's no secret that I care deeply about ministering to the next generation. And in fact, every ministry job I've ever had, even since before seminary, has included direct interaction with young people in the church. And I've long felt that the failures of today's church have been pinned on a generation who the church has failed. The church is no longer growing as it once has, and so we blame the young people who are not here. We blame the young families who are not here. We have set an expectation that the church will be made up of all generations. We expect God to bring youth and families through our doors because that's what God always does. He brought me here, so surely I can expect him to bring my grandchild, right? Well, that's how I used to think. But I don't think it's that simple. Because the moment I set an expectation for God, he sets an expectation for me. I expect God to bring the youth to church. God expects me to help him bring the youth to church. I expect God to feed the poor. He expects me to help him feed the poor. When I set an expectation for God, he sets an expectation for me. These are all good expectations, healthy ways to think about God. But it's also the case that we have unhealthy, unrealistic expectations for God. And I'm not going to waste a lot of time on this, but we do need to name a few. Now, this church expects to have a beautiful 150-year-old sanctuary and session house and manse. It would not do to meet in a strip mall, I'm told. But let's be clear. God did not make this expectation of us. We did. This church expects to meet at 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and not 11 a.m. and not 5 p.m. or midnight. Well, that too, it's a fine expectation, but it has nothing to do with God. This church expects to hear beautiful hymns played on a pipe organ during worship, and not electric guitar or drums. Well, okay, fine, that's another fine expectation, but God is impartial. He's not involved in that expectation. These are all expectations that we set for ourselves, and then we are tempted to bring God in. But God has nothing to do with where we meet or when we meet for worship or what instruments we play when we get there. When I was hired, the church set an expectation for me to grow the church, particularly among young people. And I think that this is a wonderful expectation. I believe it is in line with what God expects from this church. But having set that expectation, we have to immediately ask, what does God expect from us? Are we doing anything to follow God's expectation for us? I think Scripture can help us understand what I'm getting at. This morning, we read John's account of the resurrection of Lazarus. Lazarus has fallen ill, and so they notify his friend Jesus. Jesus encounters his two sisters, and both sisters clearly express expectations they have for Jesus. Jesus travels to where Lazarus is resting, and we read, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Lord, Martha says to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Martha has expressed her expectations for Jesus. If you had been here, my brother would not have died." Martha expects that Jesus can heal her sick brother. Well, where does this expectation come from? We gather that Martha has known Jesus for some time and has followed the progress of his ministry. And so she has heard that Jesus regularly heals the sick. So this expectation is based on her lived experience of who Jesus is. In fact, it is this expectation that caused her to call on Jesus in the first place. She only calls on Jesus because she already believes that he will heal her sick brother. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Martha's giving Jesus a very pious response. Jesus is telling her that he plans to bring Lazarus back to life, but she interprets his words through a sort of throwaway line that people give at funerals. "You'll see your loved one again. They just grew wings and flew away. God needed another angel." That's what she thinks Jesus is saying. Martha says that she believes, yes, he will rise again when God comes to collect his people. But she doesn't expect him to rise in this life. And so Jesus wants to set the record straight. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who is to come into the world." Martha believed that Jesus could heal her brother. Now she's beginning to believe that he can bring Lazarus back to life. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man from dying?" It's amazing to see the miracles of Jesus used against him. The logic of doubt is this: if he really healed the blind man, then surely he could have healed Lazarus, but he didn't heal Lazarus. And so maybe he wasn't really responsible for healing the blind man. I want to say that this logic of doubt is absolutely pernicious in the church. Instead of believing that God will do great works among us, as he has in the past, we begin to name all of the things that God has failed to do in the present, and then we begin to deny that he was ever at work in our past. The pews used to be full every Sunday morning, but they aren't anymore. So instead of calling on God to increase our numbers and partnering with him to accomplish this, we prepare and plan to become a smaller church. We remove pews. We shrink budgets. We resign ourselves to our present state. But even worse, we start to doubt whether it really was God who filled our pews to begin with. Is it the case that in the past our community just cared more? Is it the case that American culture used to be more religious? Rather than acknowledging God's faithfulness in the past and allowing that to inspire faith in the present, we allow doubt to undermine our present and erase God's work in the past. We cannot rely on the logic of doubt. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he's been in there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." We set expectations for God, and the moment we do that, he sets expectations for us. What did Martha's expectation of Jesus have to do with Jesus' expectation for her? He expected Martha to believe. She had no role to play in the resurrection other than to believe. And often that is the only expectation God sets for us. We must believe that he is who he says he is. He is the good shepherd. He is the healer. He is the resurrection and the life. God expects us to reject the logic of doubt and to believe. So far, I hope that this doesn't sound like any stewardship sermon you've ever heard before. I haven't used the P word or the T word even once. And don't worry though, we will talk about pledges and tithing in a few weeks, but for now, we have to remain focused on our expectations for God, for ourselves, and for the church. We have to discuss these very difficult questions directly, because we'll never be a healthy church until we have healthy expectations. What do we expect from God? And what role does our church play in meeting these expectations? Once we set these expectations for God and our church, what expectations does God set for us? In stewardship, this can play out one of two ways. The first is very boring. It's very uninspiring. We expect God to provide a sanctuary where we can worship him safely and comfortably. That's a fine and biblical expectation. We read about temples and altars built to worship God from the earliest days of the Hebrew people. So having set this expectation of God, he expects us to take care of the sanctuary he gave us. So we pay the energy bill that we might have light and heat. We keep the walls painted and the piano tuned. We are acting as stewards of God's gift. And this is the unescapably boring part of stewardship. It doesn't inspire faith in the vast majority of people. In the same way, paying your mortgage does not inspire faith. It is a noble burden. It is a burden we cannot afford to do without. So we draw up a very neat budget each year, and we make sure that we meet the expectations God has set for us. And I want to say that our Buildings and Grounds Committee does an excellent job of this, but even they will be the first to tell you it is sometimes difficult and menial labor. The second kind of stewardship is the complete opposite. It is deeply moving and faith-inspiring. It does not play out in the calculations of spreadsheets or the dockets of committee meetings. It resists the structure of budgets and instead relies on the empathy of human hearts. It grows out of our innermost loves and devotions. And for many, it is the most gratifying experience of God that money can buy. In the ancient church, this kind of stewardship was the sole focus of the deacons. Well, in my almost 2 years with the church, I've worked with our deacons to reclaim this ministry of stewardship. Early on, I was often asked, what do the deacons do? They always seem to be raising funds, but where does the money go? Over the past 6 months, I have led the deacons in the creation of a benevolence ministry. And this is a completely new concept for some. So let me explain by using a recent example. As a pastor in this community, I receive a steady stream of requests for financial help. Sometimes I'm able to respond to these requests using the pastor's account, but most times, the ask is too large, the need is too great so that I don't have adequate resources to help. And so I challenged our deacons to reimagine their ministry of benevolence, to commit their time and resources to meeting the needs of individuals in our community. And so about 6 months ago, we received a letter from a young woman who worked as a cancer nurse for a local clinic. And I say worked because she had learned that morning that she was laid off effective immediately with only a few hours' notice. Well, to make matters worse, she was 8 months pregnant with her first child. And losing her job meant losing her health insurance, her maternity leave. As many of you know, there's not just a whole bunch of places hiring cancer nurses on the East End, especially not cancer nurses who are 8 months pregnant. She had a mortgage to pay, a baby arriving soon, and she came to me for help. She came to our church in her time of need. She's not a member, and yet she believed that we were capable and willing of helping her in her moment of crisis. We have members of the church who don't even trust the church this much. And so I did my due diligence, and I spoke with her on the phone directly. We had multiple calls. I asked her, what happened? What support does she have from family and friends? What was her greatest need in this moment? And I told her that maybe I could get $1,000 to help cover part of a single mortgage payment, but I just wasn't sure what would be possible. At the time, we didn't have a process for handling these kinds of requests. And so I brought her request before our board of deacons and explained the situation, and their hearts broke for her. After my meeting with the deacons and a handful of private donors who stepped forward, we were able to raise $6,200. And this covered 2 mortgage payments and every item on her baby registry. This gave her the peace of mind that when her baby arrived, she wouldn't have to worry about putting a roof over their head. They wouldn't have to worry about buying blankets or bottles. They could enjoy their first days together knowing that they were taken care of. Friends, this is the work of the church. This is what Christian stewardship is. This is how Christians are supposed to love the world. This is stewardship that inspires faith. And let me tell you, none of this would have happened without the faith of the young woman stepping forward. She had faith that we would help. She had faith that God might use this congregation to care for her in a moment of need. Do we have the same faith? Do we believe that God will use us to care for our community? And if we believe this, what are we doing to make sure it happens? How are we responding to God's expectation for us? And I want to be clear in week 1 of our stewardship series that faithful stewardship is about so much more than money. We were able to bless this young woman financially, but only because we first listened to her cry for help. We set aside precious time and we gathered in our beautiful buildings for the purpose of finding ways to serve her. We took the money we had earned through bake sales and tea parties and we devoted it to a higher cause. We looked beyond the divisions of membership and instead recognized her as a fellow child of God in need. This is all stewardship. This is all living up to the expectation God has set for us, even as we continue to call on God to meet the expectations we have for Him. Throughout this series, I'm going to be sharing multiple stories just like this one, stories of stewardship that move beyond buildings and budgets. And I hope that your hearts will soften to the idea of taking stewardship more personally. What does God expect of you? What good works is He inviting you to be a part of? And what might we accomplish through our church if we would just begin to believe? Amen.